like to take this moment to introduce our fearless leader. As many as you might know, Bob started Free Cycles 20 years ago, almost to the day. It was in March of 1996 that he started Free Cycles. And this is just such an incredible way to celebrate that 20-year anniversary, discuss environmental justice in several forms and how we can move forward together and create a much more equitable world. So I'd like to have Bob just tell us a little bit more about Cycles of Change and what that's going to look like.
A little closer. As close as you want to be. I'm Bob Giordano, and yes, it was an honor to help start Free Cycles 20 years ago with a group a little bit smaller than this. And we started with free green bicycles on street corners, and it's just grown organically. Community shop, festivals, advocacy, that's a big part of what we do through our umbrella, Missoula Institute for Sustainable Transportation. Who has worked on a bike in this shop before? Who rode a bike that they built here at the shop? Good, that's good. Who needs to build a bike so they can ride to the shop? Okay, we're open 10 to 6, Tuesday through Saturday. Come in tomorrow, do a little volunteering, take an orientation, and build yourself a bicycle. We have plenty. We have a Cycles of Change campaign. We need to raise $1.1 million, piece of cake, by Mother's Day. Does everyone know when Mother's Day is? No.
May 10th.
Close.
Is it not the 10th?
May 8th. Sunday, May 8th. And we've got maybe 50 to 100 grand in pledges, but we're launching crowdfunding this coming Wednesday. We're moving Free Cycles to Caris Park for the day, a pop-up shop. And our handle, our moniker for this crowdfunding is support the bike, 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 support the bike. That's good. That's really good. I think the whole world can get behind this. And it's a lot of visuals, a lot of sculptures we can make. So drop by Caris Park next Wednesday and be prepared to send out maybe some emails to your friends and family and say there's this cool project going on in Missoula. Our goal is to buy the whole 2 acres, 28,000 square foot building. And really, Free Cycles started with environmental justice. Our air smelled foul. Who likes to smell clean air? Yeah. Clean air. We need it for you, all the little ones. So we started environmental justice, but this has really turned into a social justice movement. It's about people working with people. So that's exciting, and that's why we do the gatherings and bring people together. I think that's all I want to say. So Cycles of Change, support the bike, and really thank you to the students who came together to organize Keeping It Green, celebrating environmental justice. So really honored to have 5 folks. They happen to all be professors at the UM. I don't think that's coincidence. The universities are pretty important well springs of inspiration. I'm going to end there, so thanks, Rena. And I'll let Rena introduce our speakers, and we'll keep going.
So the first speaker that we have for you here tonight is a man by the name of Josh Slotnick. I'm sure many of you have been involved in his classes or his work as the founder and director of the Peace Farm here in town. And in his own words, I found this quote and I loved it. He's also perpetually excited about using urban agriculture as a medium to address other problems not typically associated with farming. For example, creeping homogeneous sprawl, thin local economies, social alienation, the list can go on and on. Really, there are few human issues where growing food together, well, can't but help the situation. And I do realize a bias.
Thank you all so much. It's a huge honor to be here in this space at this time, and I'm so excited to do anything that could be helping with Cycles of Change and support the bike. Yay, support the bike. So, yeah. So I was really excited that I got to come here. Was invited to give a 7-minute rant on community and environmental justice. And only 7 minutes. I can barely say hello in 7 minutes. So I'm gonna roll through the 7 minutes. It might start off a little dark, but I promise we're gonna end up on a high note. So looking out at this big crowd, how many of you out there have loved ones in far-flung places? Not Missoula, places spread out all across America, across the world, right? Pretty much almost everybody. This is kind of the norm right now. We are spread out all over the place. And I think it begs the question, how come and why? This really hit me last year at graduation. And if anybody hasn't been to an environmental studies graduation, you need something really fun to do. Go to an EST graduation. It's really small. Every student gets something said about them. It's very intimate. It's done really well. Right after graduation, a parent came up to me and she said, "Thank you so much. My daughter really loved her classes. She had such a good time here." And for a long time I was saying, like, environmental studies, what are you going to do with that? And that's the phrase that stuck with me. I'm like, so we're looking at education as a means to make yourself marketable. And what are you going to do with that? Meaning, you're going to kind of put yourself through this machine and come out a little better, a little more marketable. And then where are you going to go? Well, you're going to go wherever the free market pulls you. All places being roughly equivalent, only different in opportunity. So Duluth and Jacksonville and Ellensburg, Washington, and Missoula are all kind of the same, right? Well, there's a face to this sameness. A buddy of mine in Missoula calls it the Costco Valley. And when you're in the Costco Valley, the vistas, the views, and the experiences that can be had there all remind you of how anonymous you are. And those experiences could take place in Jacksonville or Ellensburg or Duluth. It doesn't really matter. Now, a person could say, well, so what? I just went to go get a USB cable. It doesn't really matter, and it doesn't really matter. Well, it matters because for us to enact environmental justice and social justice, our places and our people cannot be expendable. And when all of our places feel the same, they become very expendable. Are you ever going to be really sentimental, really attached? Will we ever decide to strive for the enhancement and the beautification and the celebration of the Costco Valley?
Nope.
We never will. Because there's another one just like it 90 miles away, and another one 90 miles from that, and another one. But if we are to treat each other well and treat our places well, we have to really feel, in our hearts, feel how unexpendable, how special we all are. And then we and our place becomes worthy of our care. So as a route to environmental justice, how do we get to that spot? How do we get to where we should be caring for each other and caring for our places? Here's the nugget of my little 7-minute rant. The mission for all of us should be to create reasons for us to fall in love with our place. That's our mission. When we fall in love with our place, all good behavior follows. If you love where you live, if you're in Missoula and you love Missoula, coming to Free Cycles just makes sense. Riding your bike makes sense. Going to the farmer's market makes sense. These things don't become environmental acts that you're going to contemplate and do quite seriously. Instead, they become part of your culture. And if we love where we live, how we treat people we don't know will reflect that too. We say hi to somebody walking across the bridge. It's the opposite of expendability. So my little message for you here, because I knew there would be lots of young people. In the next couple of years, you all get to choose where you're going to live. And moving about is certainly not a bad thing in and of itself. I hope that when you're moving about, you intentionally and carefully choose a place. And then once you're in that place, put down roots. And what that means is start creating reasons why you can love that place and reasons why other people can love that place. It's so apropos to be saying these things at Free Cycles. This is a reason why to love Missoula. Right? So as you go forth, think about what you can do to celebrate, enhance, beautify, strengthen the place where you're going to live. And do it through your actions, through your creations, through your treatment of others. There you go. Thank you.
Oh, wow. All right. I am going to keep us rolling with Professor George Price. And George Price is the Environmental Issues Coordinator for Indian Peoples Action, IPA. The Northern Rockies rising tide and many allies blocked the tar sands equipment, megaload trucks, 4 times during the winter of 2013 and 2014. And the megaloads have not been back to Missoula since. George is also a permaculture organic farmer on the Flathead Indian Reservation and teaches Native American Studies, History, and African American Studies at the University of Montana. George.
Yeah, you know, beautiful, beautiful, a big crowd. I didn't expect a big crowd, and I brought my little tiny visual aid there. Thank you for being here and just being who you are, all of you, and this time. And Josh, you kind of blew my mind there with that 7 minutes. I think I got a different memo that was like 10 to 15 minutes, something like that. But people know me. I think a lot of you are students that I've seen, and I tend to talk longer than I plan. But when I have a short amount of time, I actually write things out. I find that the shorter the amount of time given, the more planning I have to do, and I can't do my usual stream of consciousness wrapper or whatever I have. You know. So I'm just going to use my memory aid here and talk about alternatives on a grand scale. And I'm happy to be talking to an audience that I don't have to convince that we need a lot of alternatives, a big change in the way that not only we live with the world, but also in perception. And I'll get to that here in a minute. And so I divided it into 3 parts, and they're all pretty quick. And the first one's called The People We Used to Be, or We've Done It Before and We Can Do It Again. And that's where this comes in. I might even pass it around so you can see it a little better way in the back. You know, just handle it kind of gently. I can make a new one. So we got some coffee spilled on it. But what we got here is our common lifespan of our entire species in our present state of evolution as Homo sapiens sapiens, you know, bragging that we know more than we actually do. But what happens is, I'm a historian, right? And historians are trained to believe that there was no historiography until you had literacy, which comes with these unsustainable mega-societies. And that happens about 5,000 years ago, so a little tiny space in the big graph. The other significant thing is here you got horticulture going about 12,500 years ago. So before there was unsustainable agriculture, there was planting and growing that worked. And you know, I'd like to get in a conversation with Daniel Quinn about this sometimes, because I don't think that was the end of the world. The end of the world was overpopulation locally and unsustainability. And then when these highly admired by the status quo mega societies come in, you get people who've lived beyond the means of the place. They didn't love their place enough, And traditionally, indigenous people, when you got too much population in one place, you'd have a ceremony, you split the tribe up, and one part of the tribe moves a little farther away. That was our way probably for all of these 200,000 years. What I'm just going to say, another thing I learned is you don't have to say everything all at once in a short presentation like this is. We need to re-examine all of this and hold suspect those that said they didn't have a history because they didn't have literacy. And all the slanders and degrading things that have been said about so-called prehistoric people. These were people with oral historians who had their whole village's history memorized. They said back to the first people. They could tell you all the genealogies of everybody in their tribe. All of the people in the world at one time were indigenous people who had these oral historians that could do this. And why did these folks say we only became historians when we could master the talking papers and lose our memories and rely on something written down? Good question. I hold the entire modern world. I don't like to call it the Western world because that's an insult to the cardinal direction west. But this Eurocentric world that is an offshoot of Mesopotamia and Assyria. The problem goes back to unsustainability. That's the first part of my talk. And I would like us to re-examine First Peoples everywhere, who we normally were. So when you look at this, on this scale, you get a whole new definition of what it means to be a normal human being. It's what's been going on in the last 5,000, and you see that little tiny line there? That's American colonialism, comes in around 1500. And we're obsessed with that and saying, that's normal? No, that wasn't normal. Okay, and we need to re-examine all of this. A world in which people love their mother and all the spirits of the Mother Earth, to let the earth teach us and direct us rather than trying to direct the earth. The ways of indigenous peoples and the whole world, our whole species were like that. So, and it wasn't constant drudgery. That's the other thing these colonialist anthropologists like to say. It is a world of struggle and drudgery. What objective anthropologists the last 50 years or so discovered, with the few people around the world that are still living in the first ways in their sustainable homelands that still have a little bit of that. Average work week, when you average it out over a year's time, is a 15 to 20 hour work week. That gives you a lot of time for play, cultural activities, art, making everything beautiful, and spiritual things, ceremonies, loving, and being thankful, and taking naps too, That's one thing they discovered, these Aborigines in the north of Australia took a lot of naps. Okay, so we can pass that around. And, the last thing. Money comes in right around there too. So we're talking about a world without money and without the need for trade. Part 2. Where are all the flying saucers? Okay, now You get the wrong idea. Oh, there he goes. Back in the 60s again. Okay, no. Where are all the flying saucers? You know, you imagine these so-called advanced beings from the billions of heavenly bodies out there would be coming here and chatting us out. I'll give you a new idea about advanced. How about a content people, a people living in harmony with their mother, their homeland, the earth, and having no desire at all to fly, to go to the moon. You know, it's just, there's just so many good things happening right here on the ground in that kind of world I'm describing for you, that why would you want to create some kind of flying machine and go into outer space and learn how to breathe out there and all that? You know, it's a whole lot of trouble to risk your life and go into the unknown. And so that's all I have. That's part 2. Flying saucers. That's the whole part 2. Okay, so now we get to the point. And you know, of course, it's capitalism and aggressive competitivism that leads people to this endless pursuit of something else and an inability to be content. And no such thing as enough. I'm describing in that visual aid that's floating around so gently and kindly, thank you. I'm describing people who knew what enough was. It was good enough. It is wonderful enough. Sustainable world. Last one, part 3. And somebody give me a time check if I need to stop. Who's in charge? You're in charge, aren't you?
Keep going.
Put the brakes on me. I'm going to stop. I really am. Part 3, a future we choose or chaos forced upon us. Creating healthy, sustainable societies begins with healthy, sustainable thinking and attitudes towards the natural world. I'm just going to read one thing. I don't want to read too much. It is not enough to change to switch to green energy sources if we still hold the same mindset that led to our abuse of fossil fuels and digging in the earth and all of that, and mining and the whole thing. If we were to end fossil fuel use today, but still continue to believe that humans should rule over nature and use the earth as we see fit, we will keep coming up with destructive technologies that threaten all life on Earth, like geoengineering, bioengineering, little nano thingies with nanoviruses. Craziness will not produce a sustainable world. You can take all of the fossil fuels and not touch them anymore, create green energy, lower your consumptions, and if people are still stuck in that old mindset, we're still lost. So I just wanted to say, listen to the earth, learn from natural systems, find out what the earth wants to do, and alternatives can lead to something really amazing. And I'm just going to wrap this up and not read all that. Like free cycles and the wonderful stuff you guys are doing, home resources, something called the Missoula Time Bank. Have you heard of that? Forget about money and trade your energy and your skills and help each other out there. There's some links we can give you on that. Transition Streets movement, all of the movements towards interdependence, back to connectedness with everything and everybody, and living directly from the earth without the use of money. What I am hoping we can do is disarm the powers that have us in their grip. The primary weapon being used to destroy the earth is a capitalist monetary system and debt peonage. And debt peonage is a real old trick. It gets you to feel like there's no escape and there's no alternative. If you have access to any land, you can grow your own food. We're doing hugelkultur mounds from about there to there and about this high. Tons of food on one little space about that big. And you probably know about this too. Less water to use and a fertile nesting place that'll grow and produce. So you can do that in the town too. I live up on 5 acres north here. Last thing, so if we all started doing the alternatives, and I have a long list of them here of all kinds, make your own clothes, your own houses, grow your own food is happening. I mean, that's the furthest we seem to be going, but you can, and the bikes too in town. But we can get to a point where this would catch on internationally. You could have an international boycott of the system because we will have in place an alternative system already and a bunch of happier, healthier people that say, hey, look what we're doing here. You know, use whatever money you gotta use to get away from money, get out of debt, get away from the man, and and create the alternative. Last 2 years, the hottest on record. Last 3 months, the hottest on record in the world. It's going out of all expectations, out of control. That's why I said alternatives on a grand scale may be necessary. Thanks for listening to me, bearing with me going over time here. I'm chronistically challenged. I'm glad you suffered through that and allowed me to talk to you. I look forward to interacting with everybody and, you know, hopefully get a good discussion. And it's a never-ending discussion because we'll all be working together on these kind of things. Thank you very much.
George, thank you so much. That was beautiful. And I would just like to comment on something that you said near the beginning of your talk. You mentioned that you were excited to be here talking to everyone, you know, not having to convince us that we need a fundamental shift. And I was just reflecting during your speech about how, you know, we are the people who will go out and convince others. And this serves to revitalize and you know, really feel that spirit within us. And thank you so much for that. That was great. Up next, we have the director of the Wilderness and Civilization program at the University of Montana, Natalie Dawson. And I'd like to read to you some of her words because I also really love the way that she introduces herself. She says, I learn through experience and teach what I learn. I am inspired by wild landscapes, the opportunity to experience the planet by foot, bicycle, ski, rope, pack raft, kayak, or any other self-propelled mode of transportation. And I was reading that and thinking about the word automobile, which means self-propelled, self-mobile. And how every time I'm on my bicycle and cars are passing me, I think, I'm self-mobile, and you are not. You are relying on, you know, this very extractive process. So, if we could welcome Natalie Dawson.
All right. So real quick, I only got 12 minutes. It looks like I'm going to just kind of gauge myself on the last two speakers and go for somewhere in between. If you could all just stand up and grab the person next to you, and I need Kelsey McMullen. All right. You gotta be quiet though, because I don't have a very loud voice. All right, so my dad told me a long time ago, because I used to be petrified of talking in front of groups of people, that you do two things. You either make them laugh or you teach them something. If you could do both, great. So I'm going to teach you something. I'm going to teach you what's called the jig. It's not Irish. I learned it from a guy in the Yukon who was actually from Cambodia. So I'm not sure what kind of jig it is. You're going to start on the outside of a foot. Then you're going to go. So grab your partner, say hi. Will you dance? Great. All right. So you're going to start on the outside. You're going to go outside, inside of the opposite foot, inside of the other foot, outside, and then you're going to kick the heel of each other. And you're just going to keep repeating that, so do that for 35 seconds.
I'm watching these people.
Okay, so there's two things at play here. One is the fact that I have a really hard time being on the wing floor and not dancing. It's like impossible. So thank you for indulging me in that. Second thing is I just taught you how to stay warm. So it's a very elemental skill. And so what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is based on what I was told to talk to you about, so I'm going to try to stay on track, and I, like George, brought notes. But I'm supposed to weave in the idea of wilderness and kind of put the environment and environmental justice. So I was thinking, how do I know environmental justice as a topic. I've never had to talk about it. I don't really teach it in essence in its very form. But the more I started thinking about what I would talk about, I thought, okay, I have some ideas. So I just taught you a dance. The next thing I'm going to do is tell you a really quick story. Several years ago, I was working as a wildlife biologist on a small remote island in southeast Alaska, and I was doing this really weird thing where I was trapping small mammals and hanging them on little wires. They were dead at that point. And so you can imagine there's this woman out there in the woods. She's been out there in the woods for like 3 months trapping what inevitably are to most people mice. And she's got strings of them hanging in the trees. And these three young guys, about 17, come out of the bushes. And they look at me. They probably think I'm doing some kind of weird ceremony. And they stop, and I think, oh great, like I'm gonna have to go through this long explanation of what these mice are and what I'm doing, and it's trapping for the museum, X, Y, Z. And they go, do you have any peanut butter? And I was like, actually I do, I use it to bait my traps. I have a whole jar of peanut butter. And they're like, oh, thank you. So it turns out they were 3 students on a survival course as part of a wilderness therapy program. One student was from New York, from the Bronx. The second student was from the south side of Chicago, and the third student was from my hometown of Detroit, Michigan, home of the automobile, so I love that analogy, actually. I am a child of the automobile industry, for sure. And these 3 kids ended up spending a couple hours with me while they ate through all my peanut butter and my oats, which was the other part of my bait for these small mammal traps, and told me about the fact that they had, they'd never been outside to the point where they saw stars at night, and they had just spent 10 days as a group of 3 traveling so many miles from their base camp where all the students were located on this group solos, they call them. and they were supposed to survive as a threesome with no food, no shelter. So imagine this is before Naked and Afraid or whatever those shows are that they have now on television. This is just like they had to learn how to work as a group and survive in a relatively rough landscape for several days. And so the first thing they talked about was seeing the stars at night. The second thing they talked about, which they talked about the entire time, was being able to catch a salmon with their bare hands. Because they're in southeast Alaska, and that time of year the salmon are running so thick, you literally can get in a creek with a plastic bag and catch them. And I thought, wow, like that's it. So when I thought about giving a talk on environmental justice and how I could somehow weave in the idea that the environment is the groundwork for justice. It's the ultimate equalizer. You can take a kid from New York, you can take a kid from Southside Chicago, you can take a kid from Detroit, and you can put them in a place and tell them they have to work together as a team to satisfy basic needs, and they'll either do it or they won't. And if you don't survive, you don't survive. If you do survive, then you probably have some good stories to tell when you come out on the other side. And so that's where I'm going to start, with this idea that in all the things that we put together as a society, what we really start with is what we're given, and what we're given is the planet. We were given it a long time ago, as George mentioned, and what we've done with it over the course of the about 3 million years that we've been human has been consistently evolving and continues to evolve today. Every generation gives something to the next generation, and there's a lot of question of what do we want to give to the next generation, how many generations forward should we be thinking, what kind of foresight should we actually have, and that of course is reflected on the other side of that is what actual foresight do we operate with in reality. So story number 2 is that this past spring, my dad, who is also a child of the automobile industry in Detroit, Michigan, decided upon retirement at 65 years old that he wanted to walk across the United States, the Continental Divide. And it's about 3,000 miles from Mexico to Canada. He didn't know where the Mexican border was. I had to show him where that was on the map. He kind of knew where Canada was, but only on the Ontario side of the country, not the Montana side. So given I grew up in a family where wilderness was not a word that we used, my dad was planning a trip that would literally take him through almost every wilderness area in the Intermountain West. And I got to watch him do this journey. And the only thing he ever complained about was once he had a sore foot from a really bad toe infection. Otherwise, he walked over 2,500 of those miles alone. He met really fun people of all different ages. If you asked him what his favorite parts were, he would actually say that his favorite parts of that journey were the towns that he went to and the people that he met when he was in those towns. Because if you grow up in Detroit, Michigan, and you spend most of your life within a 150-mile radius of home, you have a certain idea of what the world looks like. And he, for the first time, really got to get out and hear people's stories from another part of our own same country, where people had very different lifestyles. And so he came back with a new idea of what the world looked like. He had basically a new geography by which to kind of measure life with. And he's been super happy ever since he got back at the end of September. And he finished, he did great. But I learned a lot from watching him do that. One, I learned that anyone can get up any day and say, I want to take a walk. I'm gonna take a walk. I'm gonna take a long walk. I'm gonna walk for 6 months and start walking. And at the same time, you can come back from that journey, re-enter society, become an even more engaged member of a family, of a community, and you are that person now because of the experiences that you had out there in that wild place. And so when I think of environmental justice, I think of the fact that the environment is what gives us the opportunity to be equitable. We're all equal. If we go out on a walk together, right now, if we were to go out, which would be if instead of talking to you, I'd rather just do that. If we were to go out on a walk and we were to just keep on walking until we ran out of food and we had to build a fire, or somebody got cold, or somebody got blisters, then we as a group would have to sit down together and we'd have to figure out how to make that person feel better, how to build that fire, how to find food. And all of a sudden it wouldn't matter what we were, who we came from, where we came from, what our backstory was, what our front story is moving forward. We just are in that place being people. And that's such a gift we can give ourselves. And any single one of us can give ourselves that anytime. So that's the way I've always thought about the environment. I grew up on 9 Mile, 1 mile north of 8 Mile. 8 Mile is not what Eminem portrayed, but it's not the wilderness either, in the beautiful mountainous sense. And yet, I figured out a way to kind of make a scrappy go of it outside over time, and still in making a rather scrappy go of it, as many students in this room can attest. I don't really ever know what we're doing, but we managed to figure it out as we go. And what I think we seem to get in this dialogue, at least in my realm now, being the director of an institute that focuses on wilderness. I came across this when we were celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Wilderness Act. A lot of people called, I got a lot of calls from newspapers across the country that were saying, what about the fact that the wilderness is elitist and it's off limits and it's inaccessible? And I was like, okay, like a wilderness area or wilderness in general, or the idea of wilderness, like what's the context here? Because wilderness as an idea of having self-propelled or self-motivated energy to go out and have a natural experience in a natural environment is something that is accessible to everyone. It's not elitist, I don't think. I think it's something that actually a lot of people who aren't elitist at all, some of the very poorest people, practice very basic life skills on a daily level. And we could learn a lot from the way many different people live. So it didn't really ever strike me as this thing that was elitist. But all of a sudden I started to think of wilderness as an injustice, as perhaps I have been given something that a lot of other people don't have. And here I've tried to make it accessible to everyone, but as one person in one community, you can only try to do so much. And so I would actually end up in these theoretical conversations with a lot of these reporters saying, I don't have a good answer for you. If people think it's elitist, then I want to know who those folks are, and I want to call them and I want to ask them, how do I make it not elitist? How do I give this opportunity to every single person? And I don't know how to do that. I also have a lot of conversations with friends that are like, well, the last thing I want is a whole bunch of people running around the woods, and the whole reason I'm here is I don't run into anybody. It's highly unlikely that we're ever going to overpopulate public lands, but what is very probable is that we could lose public lands. And although it shocks people sometimes in Missoula, as I learned in my lecture series a couple weeks ago when someone talked about privatization of public lands, that's happening very much on a national level. It's a conversation that's occurring right now in Congress, in our state legislature, about taking public lands away from people. And if we want to talk about environmental justice and something that we have as a society right now, I don't have to tell you to go out and do it, because guess what? We did it already. We already made land available to every single person in the country. If you're that kid from the Bronx, you sure as hell can go catch a salmon in Southeast Alaska. In fact, you can do it in coastal California if you can still find them, or you can go hike down a desert canyon. You can go throw rocks off a cliff until the cows come home up there on the upper Missouri Breaks. You can do anything you want on public lands aside from, the things that aren't allowed like motorcycles and bicycles, but you can do those on other parts of public land. We have these beautiful playgrounds everywhere. They're the most equitable ground we actually have, and they're not safe. They're only as safe as people make them. And so, to wrap it up, all I want to say is that I'm here to talk about the environment and environmental justice, but I can't do that without also talking about people, because we essentially gave ourselves the ability to to come back to what our basic needs are. We gave ourselves as a society this place, these places, this land where we can go and we can just be. We can all be equal. We can all just focus on being out there as individuals, as a group, as a family, as friends, have a good time, and then come out of it and bring those bonding moments, those great stories back to our communities and turn them into tangible effects on what we do when we're not out in the woods. But that ability to do that rests on the values that we put on those lands and having that accessibility and providing that equitable environment for all people. And that's something that isn't here forever. So if I was going to say, give a message or say something that we should all do going forward is, I don't necessarily expect you all to walk out of here as public lands advocates, although I would hope that you all would be. But I would say, find that thing that you're really passionate about, as Josh talked about in his first speech, and make it your own, and take that part of it and weave in the justice, weave in the right, the reason, and the objectivity that you can then provide an opportunity for someone else to share your life, to share your experiences. So that's all I have.
Natalie, that was great. Thank you so much. Anyone can take a walk, and anyone can take a walk together. What a beautiful sentiment. So next, we are going to hear from Tom Sullivan. He is.
Just for me.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
He's a professor in the geography department, and his work is in sustainable and active transportation. And he's currently working on a redesign of Missoula city streets to be more equitable. So yeah, I would like to introduce Tom Sullivan.
Wow, this is pretty awesome, all the people that showed up just for me. I could do 7 minutes. I tried out for TED Talks a couple of years ago, and I had a couple of minutes. And I go to Burning Man every year, so it's a research project. Really. And I ride my bike to Burning Man from Missoula, so in the middle of Oregon, I ran into this dude, and he's on a bike too. We were met in the middle of the desert in Oregon, and he ended up, so funny. He's like, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm on my way to Burning Man in Nevada. He's like, Burning Man? He's like, no, this is the story. This is how I open my TED Talks. What do you call it when you... Audition. Thanks, man. So I was auditioning in front of less people, but this is how I opened it. I met this guy in Oregon, and he said, why are you going to Burning Man? It's like there's naked women on drugs chasing you down. And I was like, that's a problem. I didn't get the TED Talk. So, street justice, I really have issues with how it is that automobiles do indeed have the power, the discourse on our streets, because if you think about it, streets, we don't think about it too much, are public spaces. They're public spaces that all of us just, like public spaces, wilderness, should be used in the same manner. But what I really want to talk about today with street justice is not so much the revolution of justice, which I know a lot of us, even in the room, have that, want and wish to really make changes quick. What I really want to talk about, and this is going to be for Cameron, who's, and a couple students I've had, that I subjected to my famous philosophers last year is everyday practice. And I think we need to all think about, generally revolution really seems to gain energy and happen, but then we look at things like the Arab Spring and maybe all the way back to our revolution, that do things really change, or is there just sort of on the surface this change? And maybe Albert can talk a bit more, one of my favorite philosophers on earth, who's talking after me, can talk a lot about it. And what I want to get to is this notion of personal responsibility and agency. So there's different ways that we can work to equalize the use of the public space of the street. And all of us, and Bob's just an awesome advocate for all of it, is number one, we can change infrastructure. And I have an article out that will maybe never get published of how roundabouts actually foster the community working together in such a way that it's much different than the power that we're used to when it comes to like a street light or a four-way stop. The big, huge truck usually wins at the four-way stop, and the stoplight is very impersonal. The roundabout is this wonderful, artistic, creative invention that facilitates all of us working together as a community to have this goal of getting through alive. We're constantly moving, and isn't that what we really want to be doing anyway as Americans, mobile? So it's this really nice invention, and yet, yes, it's an infrastructure piece that designers came up with to maybe not facilitate that, but the way that I would see it, and maybe we should look at the kind of, it works, right? All right. The other sort of way to do it is to change policy. And so, yeah, all of us work with city planners, and we try to change policy about how we can make intersections work better, or more bike lanes, or all of these different things that we can. They're kind of rules, well, they are rules and regulations for how our society and city citizens and community should operate, right? But, I got to admit, like Bernie Sanders and all that, but I'm kind of, I don't like a lot of regulations all the time, right? And so probably most of us are kind of in this moderate zone of like, yeah, I like the idea of community and stuff, but I want my own shit. Like I want to act the way I want to. I don't frickin' use the sidewalk all the time. I walk on the grass. We should do that. It's okay. Next time you're on campus, man, walk on the grass. Like who wrote that rule? I don't see any frickin' rules, right? So anyway, the thing about policy is there's this notion that we gotta follow the rules. And it's cool to a point. But what I want to focus on is really that notion of practice. So I have these two of my favorite people. Pierre Bourdieu, who's a famous philosopher, sociologist, French, but he's cool. And Judith Butler. Some of you that might be in gender studies, Judith Butler has a lot of work that has to do with two different things. And I'll try to finish this in a couple minutes. One is performance. So it's that metaphor of performance. I am totally performing right now. And all of you are performing in some way. And we can really kind of utilize our lives and our daily minutes and times and hours. We're kind of going through all these performances. And if you think about it, we put a different face on all the time. Like I have this face right now of being like the lecture guy, and you guys are listening, like you want to listen, but God, what's best about this is my classes are nothing like this. Like nobody's paying attention. Right? The other thing, we go through all these performances all the time, is what her notion is, and it kind of has a long line of philosophers called performativity. And what that means essentially is, as we go through performances just every minute of the day, doing our thing, it becomes an unconscious act, right? We're consciously performing, but when we're performative, it's stuff that we're doing that we don't even realize we're doing, and that's it. And her focus is on gender, how we split male and female and stuff, and how we're supposed to act, right? Gender is a social construction for, thousands of years, right? How we just continually go through this stuff, and eventually some people start to be thinking that this is something that's natural in our DNA, right? But it's not, right? Her notion is it seems to be that it's in our DNA, and we always talk that way, right? Well, it's just in his DNA that he watches the Final Four, which, God, what are the scores right now? Driving me nuts. Anyway, so if you get that notion that it's natural, that can't be changed if it's in a DNA. But if it's a social construction, it can be changed. So things like gender, this is Butler's notion, gender, should be equal, right? Gender should be equal. But we've kind of constructed it this way. So this seems really far out, but how about if we take this idea of performativity and make it into what a sociologist and there's a group of sociologists and geographers that talk about automobility. We are so focused on the automobile now that it's a part of us. In fact, you think about it just literally, the car and the person are the same thing, right? So, like my story, when I walk to work every day, I go through that intersection, and students that I've had know this, Broadway and Van Buren, right? I mean, man, I almost die every day. And it's like a bullfight. I'll walk out and the car's like, it's like, are you shitting me? You would rather run me over and not even suffer the consequences. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is the automobile has become such a part of us that it's become performative. We don't even think about it. It's such a part of our lives that we don't even think about the use of it, getting in it, all these different things, and it's these constant performances that we do every day. All right, so I'm going to finish up. How do we change what Bourdieu would talk about, this practice, this laying down of all these performances that become pretty much unconscious? Josh and I were talking, it's super difficult to change that really deep-seated, embodied practice. How do we go about it, right? My notion, how do we change practice? It's not going to happen in this overnight revolution that we're all going to start riding our bikes and we're all going to start walking. It's not going to take a change in infrastructure, although that helps. It's not going to take a change in policy. That helps. It all works together. What it's taken, think of yourself as this individual. And I think we have an ethics to change the way we live our lives. And that's what everybody's been talking about tonight in regard to transportation. So think about things like, how can we change this? Well, lead by example. Talk to your kids. Have these kinds of sessions. And think about, what can you do even more from what you've done to get here tonight? Hopefully, I don't even want to ask who drove here, right? You should just leave. But think about those things that you can do, those little things that you can begin to repeat to get yourself to the point where you're just walking out the door every morning and you're just walking to work. You're just riding your bike to work. There's no thought of using the automobile. And to me, I think this is like a third or fourth thing besides policy, infrastructure, and everything else. This is where the change has to happen. And how does that happen? It's a huge question maybe we can discuss because it's hard to solve. But I think it happens, leading by example, education, and continuing that process, right? And Josh asked me, so what do you think is the most bicycle-type friendly city in the world? It's Black Rock City, right? No doubt about it. Has anybody been to Burning Man? There's nobody here?
Wow, really?
It's all bicycles. It's all bicycles. All right, that's all I got. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tom. Our final speaker for you this evening, Jacob went to ask him how he would like to be introduced. And he said, short and sweet. And Jacob said, short and sweet. And he said, no, short is sweet. So, Professor Albert Borgmann has done his research in the philosophy of society and culture and how humans interact with technology. And hopefully the rest will speak for itself. Albert Borgmann.
Go straight. So, my talk is a preface. Here goes the preface. Information and communication technology is an amazing, wonderful thing. It's the most sophisticated, complex invention of the human family ever. And it has provided advances in medicine that would have been unreachable without ICT. And it has made possible scientific discoveries that would have been impossible without ICT. So, don't call me a Luddite. And don't let anyone get away with calling me a Luddite. Okay, on to the main part. There are two phenomena that are enveloping us in an ominous and daunting way. One is just becoming visible, sort of on the horizon, and it's global warming. And a little less visible is the demand for global justice that comes with global warming. The other is pretty much invisible, and it comes to the surface in rueful columns by people who say, I'm losing touch with my kids, I'm losing touch with my parents, with my spouse, with my partner, I'm busy and distracted all the time, I don't know what I'm doing. And then there's a lot of social science and even neurophysiological research that something is really changing. And what is it that changes us? It's ICT. It's ICT not when it's done by scientists and medical researchers. It's ICT in our daily lives. And it changes us in all those hours that we spend looking at a screen. And an interesting thing is that people who have spoken eloquently about the immediate experience have had a terrible time capturing in some way what it's all about. You know, finding a concept that sort of gathers it all together in its force and its dangers and injuries. So I'm proposing a concept. It's fog. It's as though we're all walking around in the fog. And the fog sort of softens and fuzzies up the contours of people, the contours of nature, the contours of our practices, of our past, and so we're walking around in that fog. And do we get lost? Not really. There's this little magic wand that we all carry with us called smartphone. And when you're lost, you take your smartphone and find out what's going on. So I meet this person, right, at a professional conference, and he says, I'm Joe Miller, and okay, Joe Miller. And I have sort of a vague idea of who Joe Miller is. Then as soon as I have a moment, I Google Joe Miller. and then the interesting is, I have a very sharp, but totally flat picture, without background, of Joe Miller. But it tells me what I want to know. How much has he published? Not even a book. Where did he get his degree? That's Kansas State. Forget about Joe Miller. Joe Miller is not going to be a rival. So there's a person who is totally lost in the landscape in this fog, and the person says, where am I? The person uses his GPS device and says, oh, Glacier Park. And then looks around and says, what's this? It's a funny looking peak. You use your app, and your little screen tells you it's Chief Mountain. Oh, Chief Mountain. That's interesting. What about Chief Mountain? There is a Vision Quest site on Chief Mountain. Oh, how interesting. And what about my Facebook? The stuff comes from nowhere and it disappears into nothing. And so you're totally dependent on a system that's nothing. And most of the energy and the power, the money, the attention is directed towards people who are thickening and raising the fog. And the interesting thing is, it's same old, same old. It's just more of the same thing. So who are the real innovators? They are the people who are recovering reality by engaging it. They make the fog lift. And how do they make the fog lift? By putting bicycles together, by riding bicycles, running, skiing, growing food, making furniture, throwing pots. And the thing goes by different names, the local labor-intensive industry, or the artisanal economy, the post-industrial economy, things like that. And this is the real innovation. This goes against the grain. And of course, against the background of technology, these things are new. They're exciting. But that's where progress lies, in the recovery of reality and in making the fog lift. And then two things happen. One is you see global warming and you see the need for global justice. And then you respond to it by working towards a life that's simple enough so that there's at least a prospect that everyone on the globe can come up to the same level. We have to come down. They have to come up. That's what global environmental justice requires. And it's the direction. You guys, you people are working things in the right direction. Now, the people who are walking around in the fog and the people who are busy generating more of it, for them, environmental justice is either totally invisible, and there's lots of evidence that it is, or it's sort of a bitter, hard thing to do that you would rather not do. And the second thing that you people are doing is, for you, the simple life is not a threat. It's something that fills you with energy and excitement and self-confidence. And therefore, you can, in good conscience, work towards environmental justice. And it's not a bitter and terrible duty. It's something that you want to do and that you want to share. Now, there's one thing, however, that fills me with sorrow, and that is there is all this energy out there, this innovation, that excitement, and politically it's nowhere. I mean, nobody talks about you in the campaign, right? The presidential campaign, which is sort of, the periodic national conversation that we have about the most important things. You don't figure it. And you won't until you unite. And all the people who are growing the food and making the furniture and throwing the pots and brewing beer and riding their bikes and running and say, we're doing the same thing. We're all doing the same thing. And then you have, once there is enough cooperation and sort of self-confidence, then you have to make it count politically. And you have to do it in a way that's going to make a difference. You're already changing the culture. Yay. But there isn't enough time for the culture to change slowly, so that your great-grandchildren perhaps are going to win an election. You have to make your political power felt, and you have to put it in a place where it has a chance of making a difference. Not some utopian whatever, but support those people who have the best chance of doing the closest thing to what you want the world to be like. But even that, I think, can be and will be supported and energized by the things that you do, being in touch with reality and celebrating all the wonderful things that the engagement with reality brings with it. So there.
Wow, Albert, thank you so much. I cannot imagine what I would say to follow that up, so I'm just going to thank you all once again for being here. I would like to give another round of applause to Bob and Free Cycles.